to 3% of European GDP, which is impressive. But what we wanted to underline is that around that industry, we have many industry that directly or indirectly depends on that core creative industry, and that mechanically will be at risk due to piracy. And instead of amount more or less equivalent to 3% in the previous study, we have made a demonstration that in Europe today, creative industry and the interdependent industry represent close to 7% of European GDP, which is obviously an impressive amount, and most of time in a period of economic crisis. We also made the calculation as regard the jobs that were directly or indirectly related to that economic scope, and with an assessment equivalent to close to 15 million jobs. And you will find in that study that can be freely downloaded. You just make Terra Consultant and piracy, and you directly go to that study that is available in French, in English, and so. And you can find also details for the 5 main European markets, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And you will observe that, for example, in the case of UK, that economic footprint is equivalent to 10% of UK GDP. Second question, we have tried to assess the consequences of piracy, both on retail revenues and job. And the idea behind was to say, well, we are obviously in the middle of wide diffusion of piracy tools and techniques. I don't know how to say that more precisely, and especially peer-to-peer. And we have taken data on a national basis as regard the rate of infringement combined with a substitution rate. You maybe know, if you are familiar with that kind of study, that a very sensitive dimension of the problem is how what is the proportion of sales that are not realized due to piracy. And for example, as regard music, which is a field in which we find the main the most important studies, we have evaluation for the most serious one from 10% to 30%, and we have selected as to be not to have an inflation of our result. We have retained the substitution rate equivalent to 10%. It means that each time that one people, maybe some of them are in the room today, download illegally one file of music or 10 files of music, it represents one file that is not sold and with a decrease of the revenue for the industries. And once again, you will find in the study a result on a national basis, but globally it represents for 2008 10 billion of euro in retail losses for all the sectors that were included in the study, meaning music, movie, TV series, and also software. It means that on the other side, we have not included, for example, issues that are probably important issues but that we were not able to include in the scope of the study from a technical point of view. I have in mind, for example, broadcasting of sport events. And maybe, and obviously for the future, the book industry will be probably the next on the list if nothing is done. So the starting point for 2008 is 10,000 retail losses and 10 billion euros in terms of retail losses. and close to 200,000 jobs that were directly or indirectly lost. And the last question we tried to highlight was to make projection between the year that was our starting point, meaning 2008, to 2015. This is a kind of exercise as to send a clear warning. The basis of our analysis was to say we will take data from Cisco as regard the projection in terms of traffic between now and 2015, and that data were available, and we will modify that data inside of the model that was built for that study. And we have made two scenarios for the future. The first one is the so-called file sharing trend scenario, meaning that behind that we have the data of Cisco for file sharing, and meaning that behind that, and this is rather conservative, we have the assumption that the tools for piracy will continue to be centered on peer-to-peer. And in that case, we move up to 32 billion euro of losses for Europe once again, and up to 600,000 job losses in 2015. And we have done the same kind of exercise inside of another scenario, the so-called consumer IP traffic, meaning that behind that we have taken the projection of Cisco as regard the growth of IP traffic. And from my point of view, that kind of scenario is maybe more relevant due to the diversification of piracy tools in the future that won't be limited to peer-to-peer, but that will move especially in the field of direct download. I want to underline also that we have not been able to take into account other elements in that scope, meaning, for example, piracy related to mobile, for example, and that will be obviously a key question in the future with the growth of the bandwidth for mobile telecommunication. So what can we say to conclude? First of all, to remind what were the main results. First of all, for 2000, the scope of creative industries that are at risk due to piracy, to digital piracy mainly, represent a huge amount of, a huge proportion of GDP and of very qualified jobs in Europe. So the problem behind piracy in that domain cannot be anymore a philosophical problem. This is not only an issue of transition between two economic models. Things are to be done, and you will have some explanation this afternoon as regard what has been implemented in the scope of Hadopi law in France. It will be the session of the beginning of this afternoon, I think. But it is impossible not to do anything. This is the first conclusion, and moreover, that conclusion is we have worked with the team in US that has done the same kind of calculation. I want to emphasize that this issue is obviously a big issue if we want to keep the diversity of our cultural heritage in Europe. So, just one last remark. We don't say anything as regard the solution to that problem in the study. The study was dedicated to assess the importance of the problem, which was quite an important contribution, I think, because nothing has been done before. But our aim was not to define what we were supposed to do. But my personal view is that we cannot have an objective to completely remove of the scope any digital piracy due to the large availability of that networks, this is not a consistent goal in terms of regulation and of public policy. But what we can obtain if, for example, Adobe law is a success, even a limited success, is a decrease of the intensity of piracy, giving the possibility for new economic model. I have in mind, for example, the case of Deezer, which is a French small business and a rather interesting startup. If we are not able to decrease the intensity of piracy, there won't be any economic space, any ability to breathe for that kind of startup. And then the aim of that regulation is to give more economic space for new economic model, not to preserve the economic model that we have behind us. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Patrice. Again, just drawing it back to some of the things that our leaders said. You know, Francis Gurry in his opening remarks mentioned that we need a better understanding of the value of the intangibles. And what I liked about the approach that Tara took to that study is that it was a bit of a good news, bad news story. Because they start off by telling us what's the value of that intangible, what's the value of IP, what's the value of the products derived from IP to the creative industries in Europe. Let's start there. What's it worth? How many jobs, how many people get their living through this IP? And then the rest of the report is about what's at risk and what it costs us. So I thought it was a job well done, and I thank you for presenting that today. Now, what I've got here is a situation where we have 15 minutes and 2 more speakers. So if they each speak for 30 seconds, then that will leave a few minutes for discussion. Anyway, the next speaker is David Benjamin, who's going to present on behalf of Dr. O'Flaherty the study that we're launching today on the economic and social impact. So, David. Yes. Yeah, just straight down.
Okay. Damien worked on this for 18 months and put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this study. And then he got